If they continue to get away with declaring major cities war zones, will it stop the voting process? Okay, so I'm going to back up a little bit here. I just threw out Stephen Miller's name. I also threw out Kristi Noem's name. And I think there's something that so far I haven't seen in the questions that is important. And maybe it's because you're seeing it everywhere else and you don't need me to talk about it. But there's two really important things that go hand in hand, maybe three, that are all operating right now. First of all, Donald Trump is not apparently, I'm sorry, I just hit delete again. Donald Trump is apparently not in control of the administration. He's pretty openly not able to answer anything that's going on. He throws questions to other people. If you hear him in interviews, he just sounds bonkers. He's not calling the shots. Two people at least are the ones running things. One is, or appear to be, one is Russell Vought at the Office of Management and Budget, and I'm not going to talk more about him today, I don't think. But the other is Stephen Miller, who is the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. White House advisor Miller is, according to The Guardian, the one who has ordered the strikes on the Venezuelan boats. A report out today says that he thinks this is a way to convince people that immigrants are terribly dangerous at a time when, as I mentioned before, the Trump administration is deeply underwater on its attacks on immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants, because during the campaign, Trump said that he was only going to go after, the criminals, the rapists, the murderers. But what people didn't understand, and when I had an argument with somebody who was voting MAGA over this, what people didn't understand is the Trump administration considered anybody who had entered the country illegally a dangerous criminal because they had broken the law about not coming in without documentation. Now, that is not a felony, by the way, but they considered anybody who was undocumented a criminal. And that's what they did in the first term. And that's what they meant in the second term. But you had to read between the lines. Now you're seeing it played out, and people don't like it. They do not like losing their neighbor of 30 years. They do not like, watching mothers being torn away from their children. They do not like this. So you still see Trump and Kristi Noem and people like Miller talking about how immigrants are, criminals and terrible and so on. And yet support for immigration now, because of these attacks, is the highest it's been in years and years and years. People are like, wait a minute, we're a country of immigrants. And a little bit of a rabbit hole here. I just want to, well, never mind. Although that's killing me. I might come back to it. So he's apparently trying to convince people that these people in these boats are bringing in, as Trump said, enough drugs to kill. I think Trump said 30,000 people. Well, there's a real issue here in that the drugs that tend to kill people in the United States, the illicit drugs, because some of these drugs can be used in therapeutic ways as well, but the illicit drugs tend to be fentanyl, which comes from Mexico, from precursor chemicals that are made in China. And that's what the Biden administration worked to do, was to break that cycle so that China would crack down on the shipping of precursor chemicals. And the administration, that both the Mexican and the American administrations, were cracking down on the financing of what are essentially at this point factories building fentanyl in Mexico. But the people that the U.S. has been targeting have been from Venezuela, which does produce, I think it's cocaine. I'm sorry, I'm not really good on I'm better on where the interventions are than where the actual drugs are grown. But in any case, they do produce drugs, but it's not fentanyl. They produce something else. And at least one alleged wife of one of the people who died, said, my husband was a fisherman. And of course, they're being struck way farther than they ever could have gotten across the water to the U.S. in those small boats. So it doesn't add up. I mean, the administration has never said has never shown any evidence to lawmakers or to the public that they're actually hitting drug dealers. They're just showing these videos of these boats blowing up, and they are truly horrific videos. I would urge you not to watch things with all the trauma that we're already going through, to not to watch the things that really you think will be a problem for you. I do try and watch them because I feel like I'm keeping a record and I need to see things, but they are profoundly disturbing. So, um, the if Miller's in charge of that, Miller also not wants to get rid not only of undocumented immigrants, he wants to get rid of people of color altogether. And he has this fantasy of this sweep of stopping immigrants, of turning America into some fantasy version of his past. We have always been a country of immigrants, and the country, by the way, dates from the Constitution. Although we certainly have a precursor to that, but we've always been a nation of immigrants. His family is a nation of immigrants. I mean, his family is a family of immigrants. And when people talk about it, it always gets me when somebody like Bill O'Reilly or Sean Hannity talks about this great past before those people arrived. Because in the 19th century, Irish Americans were literally not considered white, nor were Italian Americans. And so this idea of there was some pure white, I mean, whiteness really is a construct. I'm not going to go through that, but this idea that anyway, all right, that was the rabbit hole I wasn't going to get down. Anyway, Miller is really going after the purification of the country, in his words or in his ideology, into a white Christian nation, which it never has been, by the way. It just never has been. We had Muslims in one of the first non-indigenous people to set foot on what became the United States of America was a Black Muslim man named Estevanico, which someday I'll do a video on. But anyway, I'll stop. But he has this fantasy of going back to what he thinks of this white world. But the problem with that is it involves getting rid of the Democrats who are protecting the idea of a multicultural democracy. So one of the things he is doing is he is trying to declare war on democratic cities, on cities where people of color vote, where women vote. And in order to do that, they've tried a number of different things. And one of the things that Stephen Miller is really pushing is the idea of Donald Trump invoking the Insurrection Act. The Insurrection Act is under Title 10 of the U.S. Code. The U.S. Code is our laws. They're available online if you ever want to look. They're pretty complicated, but they're not, they're divided up, so you can find this stuff pretty easily. And the Insurrection Act gives the president power to override the Posse Comitatus Act, which is from 1878, and says that the government cannot use federal troops against U.S. citizens to enforce, normal law enforcement. You can override that with the Insurrection Act, which is actually sort of a boiled down series of laws from a long period of time. Miller desperately wants Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act because, as he says, that gives Trump any power he wants. It gives him plenary power. I'm sure there's a question here about that. What this is all about is that there is a German political theorist named Carl Schmitt. I've talked about him before, named Carl Schmitt, and he looked at liberal democracies and he wasn't keen on how liberal democracies worked. And he said that liberal democracies, and this reflects the Constitution under which the Weimar Republic worked, but he said, if you have an escape clause, essentially, that says you have, and you can create an exception, that's where the power in that Constitution really resides. It's extra constitutional. You can go outside it. And I've talked a lot about how this administration is going outside the Constitution because you can declare an emergency and then do whatever you want. And if you can do that, you can make everything an emergency and you can get rid of liberal democracy. Well, Trump has announced, I believe it's 8 emergencies, declared 8 emergencies since he took power, a tariff emergency, an emergency at the border, and so on, to garner all this power. But if he invokes the Insurrection Act, according to Miller, he can do anything he wants. That's the plenary power. But somebody asked the other day, asked here, Why did Miller do that the other day when he was talking to CNN and he said, "Well, as we know, under Title 10, if Trump invokes that, he has plenary power." And then um, uh, Miller just stopped. But it wasn't a technical difficulty. Miller's eyes were still moving. It didn't go dead. Why did he just stop there? Well, maybe he had a brain freeze, which, by the way, I did once on a radio show. I completely forgot everything. I couldn't remember anything. My mind went completely black, and I'm just looking around my kitchen like, what am I doing here? So it can happen. It's only happened once, but like literally, I still am sitting there thinking, I'm on a radio show and I have no idea what to say next. There was a book tour probably 20 years ago. So maybe he just had a brain freeze. Or maybe he was playing to the one person who is his main audience. He is constantly on TV. Trump watches him, and he is feeding Trump these stories about how terrible the country is and how much power Trump has. And leaving that last word, plenary power, and then stopping, that's what everybody heard. That's what Trump heard. And that is clearly very much on Miller's mind. He desperately wants Trump to invoke the Insurrection Act, and that would give him the power to use the troops against the people that the administration is calling traitors, is calling un-American, is saying, they are now saying that anybody who speaks up against Trump is Antifa, which isn't even a thing. It's the idea that you don't want fascism. I guess I'm Antifa, right? And they're running this whole idea that there's this organized group of people who are somehow a conspiracy theory, which is just bonkers. I'm sorry, just bonkers. So that idea of getting Trump to agree to invoke the Insurrection Act is part of what's going on with these. They are clearly showing him videos of Portland in 2020 when he talks about boarded up plywood windows, for example. That was actually the case on the main square of Portland in certain places in 2020. It's not at all the case today. I mean, there's before the judge who just took on a case about the deployment of National Guard troops in Portland said, there were 20 people at the ICE facility, and they were giving you the middle finger. That is not an insurrection. That's protest. There's just no reason to call out any kind of troops. So that whole concept of creating an insurrection and saying you can put troops on the streets because of that is, to go back to that question, very much about 2026. It is very clear to everybody that this administration is profoundly unpopular, and that when it goes, not if it goes, when it goes, we're going to look at an entirely new country. And so those people who are wedded to the idea of their ideology of Christian nationalism or of white nationalism in Miller's case, or even just of power, even just people who want to be making bank on this administration, as a number of them are doing everything they can to hold on to that power. And this is part of the whole attempt to keep the idea of there being an insurrection going on in Chicago or Portland. Why those cities? Somebody asked here, because Portland, I think they thought might be easy after 2020 to get people to turn out and create a situation that might look as if it were an insurrection. LA, similarly. Chicago, because it would be a real prize for Trump, because J.B. Pritzker is there, and because he resents J.B. Pritzker so profoundly.